I'd like to say good morning to everybody and remind everyone to please place your cell phones on silent. If you need to take a call, please step out into the lobby. You may notice committee members accessing their laptops, phones, or other electronic devices during the meeting. They are using their devices to access committee meeting materials that are in electronic format. This is an official meeting of the Naturopathic Medicine Committee of California, and as such, disruptions of the committee's business will not be tolerated. We have designated time on the agenda for public comment and will allow public comment on each agenda item. We ask that you be respectful of the need to conduct the committee's business. Should anyone disrupt the meeting, the chair will ask that person to conduct themselves in such a manner that permits the committee to transact its business. The committee welcomes public comments on any item on the agenda, and it is the committee's intent to ask for public comment prior to the committee taking action on any agenda item. If for some reason we forget to ask for public comment on the agenda item and you wish to speak on that item, please raise your hand or come forward and you will be recognized. I would like to remind everyone that the committee may not discuss or take action on any item raised during the public comment section of the agenda, except to decide whether to place the matter on an agenda of a future meeting. I will take roll call to establish quorum, and I will also take roll call vote for any item that the committee wishes to take action on.
This is Dr. Dara Thompson. I am calling to order the meeting of the Naturopathic Medical Committee. This is Tuesday, January 28th. This is Tuesday, January 28th, 2020 at 10:11 a.m. We are at 1747 North Market Boulevard, Suite 186.
Okay, I'll go ahead and take a roll call vote. Dr. Dara Thompson,
Present.
Dr. Greta D'Amico,
Present.
Dr. Vera Singleton,
Present.
Dr. Bruce Davidson,
Present.
Dr. Mina Yoon,
Present.
and Ms. Shirley Worrells. Oh, there you are. Ms. Shirley Worrells.
I thought I had powered it off, but it has a mind of its own. Sorry
No
about
worries.
that.
It's okay. All right, and Dr. Thomas Quinn is absent with cause today, and we've got 2 vacancies.
At this point, we're going to move forward into our agenda for the day. Are there any current public comments? Hearing none, I'm going to move forward with the review and possible adoption of the Naturopathic Medical Committee's 2020 to 2024 strategic plan. Rebecca, can you update us on that?
All right. If you guys remember right, back in July on the 25th, we met, the committee met and went through the exercise on creating a new strategic plan for the 2020-2024 session. This draft here is everything that we created. There were some edits to it after we sent it out the first time. So this is the new draft with all of those minor edits in here. We can go through this. If there are any edits that you guys would like to have made for clarification, or if it's just totally wrong, please let me know. We'll go ahead and make those changes. And then if it feels that you guys are okay with it, we can have you guys adopt it today.
I have a few things. So as I go through the document, we have a page that says mission, vision, and values. And then the next page just goes into licensing. And I think there should be some title about what does that mean? Is this goals?
So are we on page 14?
Page 16.
Page 16.
Mm-hmm.
Right, this is started.
So 14 is the goal areas and summaries that we discussed. Page 15 would be the mission, visions, and values. And then page 16 is where the actual strategic plan starts. So that's under the licensing. 16 would be licensing, would be the first.
So I would just suggest for readability, a title that says, strategic goals for this plan, just what is this?
Okay.
I don't know if anybody else,
Okay.
just to be clear.
So you just want to add strategic to
Just
in
something
front of
above
goals?
number one, just because it's not really following the outline form if we don't have a title for what this section is,
You mean under licensing?
before licensing. Like, licensing is number one of what? Because the last thing before it is values.
Well, I think if we look on page 14, it says goal area summaries, and licensing is the first one of those. And so it's possible that the transition would be smoother if pages 14 and 15 were switched in order.
Looks good.
Okay.
Yep.
Sounds good. We can definitely do that. So we will switch page 4 and 5. Nice. Absolutely.
Then on page 17, the last item, educate licensees in verifying and confirming that any professional practitioner they work with is licensed to protect licensees from being in violation. I think we could maybe use them instead of saying licensees twice. I found myself reading and rereading it over again to try to understand what it meant, but maybe others have other suggestions.
I mean, I hear what you're saying in that I also don't like using the same word 2 times in one sentence just from a sort of verbally aesthetic standpoint. And yet you're talking about both the licensees and the professional practitioners that they work with. So I think them is
Well, why
becomes
don't we say to
ambiguous
protect
in that context.
both licensees then, so it's clear? Because we're saying educate licensees, so we have party one, in verifying and confirming that any professional practitioner, party two, they work with, is licensed to protect licensees. Which one? Who are we talking about? Yeah, so if it's both, then let's just put both in front of the word.
To protect the naturopathic doctor from being in violation?
Or maybe we're protecting I don't know what the intent is here. Who are we protecting? I think we're protecting the naturopathic doctor.
Well, yes, so.
Sorry. It's definitely up to the licensee, naturopathic doctor licensee, to verify that any professional that they're working with is licensed correctly and that they're not under review or anything like that. So,
Why don't we just say to prevent being in violation?
okay.
I like that, to prevent being in violation and further protect consumers.
Okay, so educate licensees in verifying and confirming that any professional practitioner they work with is licensed to prevent being in violation.
And maybe appropriately licensed or some sort of a qualifier.
Licensed.
Yeah, I mean, they could have a driver's license, but we want them to be licensed for what they're doing.
Actually, you could put,
Right, and you can have an inactive license or a restricted license and wouldn't allow you to do.
so appropriately licensed, comma, to prevent being in violation and further protect consumers.
Yep. Okay. All right, we've got that change.
My next one's on 18,
Okay.
3.2. Practice as trained, is that a standard noun thingy altogether with hyphens? Okay.
We've been using it since 2004 when we've tried to gain being able to practice as
Okay.
trained.
3.3, advanced scope of practice to meet legislative mandates to fulfill mandate of committee. I was getting a little mandate confused here. To fulfill committee duties, maybe.
Directives.
Or it actually says it all, advanced scope of practice to meet legislative mandates for the committee.
I'm sorry, how did you just say?
Legislative mandates for Of or for the committee? What do you guys think, of or for?
Advanced
Legislative
scope of
mandates.
practice to meet legislative mandates of the committee.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
And then, when you're ready, 3.5, I would suggest that we just move that sentence around to put North American Naturopathic Continuing Education Council, add NANSIAC as a continuing education provider to broaden continuing education opportunities.
Add Nancy as.
A.
As a continuing
Yeah.
education
Yeah.
provider? Okay.
Yeah.
So it'll read, add North American Naturopathic Continuing Education Accreditation Council as a continuing education provider to broaden continuing education opportunities.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect.
And then in 3.6, I just wanted help with refreshing my memory about, did we need further regulations and guidelines for medical assistants?
So, we continuously get calls from NDs asking what naturopathic assistants can do. We also have people that are turning licensees in because they believe that they are allowing naturopathic assistants to provide more than what should be allowed in their scope. Stopping IVs, changing medication bags in IVs, which absolutely shouldn't be done by an assistant. So I don't know, and I made this point while we were making this, I don't know if we actually need to make more regulations for this, but I think some kind of maybe FAQs or something that maybe clarify those regulations a little bit more, because they really aren't unclear. It specifically states exactly what they're allowed and not allowed to do. So I think that would be something that you guys would need to determine, whether you want to do regulations.
So why don't we say something like clarify guidelines for naturopathic medical assistants and create regulations as needed to facilitate safe practice?
So clarify instead of create? Guidelines?
Clarify or create, but as long as we have the as needed at the end, gives us a little wiggle room to determine if we actually need to do it once we look into it more.
Okay.
I agree. I think that create sends the message that there's not
Nothing
something that
there.
already exists, which is
Okay.
untrue.
I definitely want regulations as needed because we might not need to make regulations. Yeah. You want to read it back?
Sure. I have clarify guidelines for naturopathic medical assistants to provide clarity and facilitate safe practice as needed.
No.
No.
Clarify guidelines for naturopathic medical assistants and create regulations as needed. You can just cross out provide clarity because we put clarify, we don't need to clarify to provide clarity.
So do you want to take out the facilitate safe practice?
I don't think it's necessary because we've repeated in here many times that that's our intent overall, kind of overarching. But I don't mind it if it's in there, depending on what everybody else feels.
Okay, so currently I have clarified guidelines for naturopathic medical assistants and create regulations as needed.
Yeah, do you guys want to facilitate safe practice?
What's the harm in not including it?
None.
I also don't think it's necessary in this context.
Yeah, because we have that repeated so many times in the document.
Perfect.
Okay. On page 19, 4.2, identify and implement a resource for tracking the committee's work to enable committee members to monitor maybe its progress. Or, I mean, it's okay. It's just a little. Or to implement a resource to assist members in tracking the committee's work. You like that? Yeah. Identify and implement a resource for tracking, resource to assist committee members, no, to assist members in tracking the committee's work.
Okay, so identify and implement a resource for tracking,
No, to assist members.
okay, hold on. Okay,
In tracking the committee's work. Everybody else okay with that? Page 20. I'll read it as it is, and I'll give you my suggestion. Explore opportunities to educate legislators and educate health-related boards and professional associations about naturopathic medicine and the Naturopathic Medicine Committee to inform, foster relationships, reduce confusion, and gain support. So my suggestion is explore opportunities to educate legislators, comma, take out and educate, health-related boards, and professional associations about naturopathic medicine and the Naturopathic Medicine Committee in order to inform, foster relationships, reduce confusion. And the gain support thing, I just was wondering, is that not implied? It's a little political to me just to have those words in there.
yeah, it probably should be
Yeah,
removed.
so just reduce confusion. We might even take out reduce confusion because that's what we're doing when we inform and foster relationships.
Right.
Why even bring up the possibility of being confused?
Yeah. So we were confused. We are confused.
Okay, so I have explore opportunities to educate legislators, comma, health-related boards and professional associations about naturopathic medicine and the Naturopathic Medicine Committee in order to inform and foster relationships.
Good.
Okay.
And then in 5.3, I just suggest removing supplementations and making it supplements. Or supplementation. Supplement. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I'll defer to you guys on that.
Vaccines.
We want it to be consistent with the others, so vaccines, homeopathy, and I think supplementation is more in
Yep.
line than supplements.
Supplementation.
Okay, so remove the S?
Yeah.
Okay.
And is that still pure in terms of, do we all remember what we meant by that? And is that still correct?
Well, I think the original intent behind this was to clarify the stance of, and I mean, it may be questionable for us as a committee to clarify the stance of naturopathic medicine as a whole, but I mean to clarify how naturopathic doctors view these particular therapies. Vaccination, homeopathy, and therapeutic supplements.
And we'd like to keep the homeopathy in here with the kind of issues that are surrounding homeopathy right now.
I mean, that's the issue, right?
Mhm.
Because homeopathy is kind of on the chopping block at the moment.
Yeah,
But so is a lot of IV nutrients. Just because something of value is on the chopping block doesn't mean we shouldn't speak out for it.
sure. And I know that there's a lot of NDs that have some of the homeopathy, maybe not everything, but they have parts of it that they use quite a bit. So,
Well, I mean, it's, how many classes did we take in school? It's probably 4 or 5. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a significant part of our training,
okay,
and it's a significant part of the history of naturopathic medicine.
Sure.
You know, old-time traditional naturopaths used primarily hydrotherapy and homeopathy as their primary source of treatment, and that's not the current scope, but it's not just some ancillary thing that got added.
sure.
I'm trying to remember our conversation, like when we generated this item.
Right.
And I do remember us recognizing certain threats potentially to practice in these areas.
I remember
But I'm
the
not sure if this was to address that or something else.
Right, I remember the discussion of vaccination and the idea being that people have this assumption that naturopaths are anti-vaccine, which is, you know, certainly untrue.
Correct.
And then what I'm trying to remember is why we grouped the vaccination with homeopathy and therapeutic supplements. Maybe it's just that, because the homeopathy and the therapeutic supplements are under significant FDA scrutiny currently. Vaccination's a totally different, like, it doesn't seem like it really belongs in the same category, except for people to understand what our stance is, but like, they're definitely different therapeutics and in a different place politically.
Sure. And I think if I remember right, it was kind of to deal with the misconceptions of how naturopathic doctors deal with vaccines, why we use supplements the way we do, and how homeopathy kind of comes in part as play. If you want to separate them, you could, but these are definitely three main things that when somebody, especially in the political realm, hears naturopathic doctor, these are the three things that come to play all the time. These are the things that we're always talking about and trying to defend naturopathic medicine on. So to communicate these things to whoever needs to know about it is definitely something that should be part of our business, but whether you want to keep these all three in one item, definitely something we can think of.
Could, just as just to start on a different way of saying this, we could say, clarify the education and use of vaccines, homeopathy, and supplements in naturopathic medicine as needed.
But I think that then limits its capability for us to communicate the value of it, because it's not just about naturopathic medicine, it's about its overall use, period, for even consumers to use it. So yes, it applies to us, but it also applies to, this is the safety around using homeopathy, because we're really outside of the Homeopathic Association. There's very little qualified parties to talk about its efficacy.
So if we think about who we're communicating to, we're potentially communicating to the public and also to other stakeholders like other boards and associations because there's misconceptions in all three of these areas regarding naturopathic medicine.
We also have to remember that this is our strategic plan as a committee and not as individual naturopathic doctors. So what do we as a committee need to communicate versus, I understand what you're saying, Vera, and I certainly have a lot of opinions personally about homeopathic medicine, as well as supplements. But what do we as a committee need to convey for the public good? Like, so what is because that's really our goal in the strategic plan. And so if our goal is to communicate how supplements and homeopathy can and should be used safely, that's one thing. The stance of naturopathic doctors on vaccination seems more like a public education clarification issue, and I do think that they're different.
So that being said, I actually come back to the way it is now is actually okay, now that I understand more what we were thinking. Because approach gives you a lot of flexibility for what you're going to say, but that we want to keep it in the forefront of our minds as we go forward, because there's opportunities to resolve issues that don't need to be there.
Do you want to keep it as is, communicate the approach of naturopathic medicine to vaccines or of vaccines, homeopathy, and supplementation to clarify misconceptions?
2 vaccines.
Two, okay.
Too.
That's all I had. Thank you for your indulgence.
Perfect.
And really quick, just to add, so do you feel it's not necessary to add in the word safety? Is that inclusive? Is approach inclusive of that then?
I think safety was one of our overarching values that runs through the whole document, so we don't necessarily have to mention on each item. But it doesn't hurt to if that's, I think if we leave it general, that gives us a lot of flexibility, and that's kind of an obvious thing that is the purpose of our existence.
And if you look at the last 2 words in that section of 5.3, the whole point of that is to clarify misconceptions and not to give opinions about the specific therapies or the safety of the specific therapies, but rather the thing that ties those 3 together is that they are misperceived.
Okay.
So I had a couple of items for it.
Sure.
On page 18, I think there's a typo in 3.8, the fourth to the last word should be statute with a T. Yeah. And unless we're going to put up a naturopathic medicine statute.
That'd be wonderful.
And then at the very end, I was wondering, it seemed to me as though that last page, which is page 21 here, the second bullet refers to a table, but there is no table. Is that going to be inserted?
Yeah, that's a good question. So what I will do is let me just underline, or let me just put a little bullet here, and I will check with the strategic planning group to see if we can go ahead and get that table and enter it in here. And all it was identifying who took the survey.
Yeah, I remember seeing a draft of it, or maybe it was in a previous version, but yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I'll get that back.
I have an edit.
Sure.
Page 22, the zip code is not 95820.
Where's that?
At the top, right here. Oh, it says,
Oh.
yeah, I believe
Oh.
that's incorrect. It should be
Okay.
95834.
Yep. Perfect, thank you for catching that.
Correct. So we'll need a motion that encompasses all of the edits that you guys have just provided. And you'd like to adopt this strategic plan with the edits provided. Would you like for her to go over all of them again? Or you good with how she went over them as each item passed?
I'm comfortable personally with having gone over them.
Okay.
All right, so can I get a motion to adopt the 2020-2024 strategic plan with amendments as noted?
So moved.
Thank you, Bruce.
A second?
Thank you, Greta. All right, I'll take a roll call vote. Dr. Dara Thompson?
Aye.
Dr. Greta D'Amico?
Aye.
Thank you. Dr. Vera Singleton?
Aye.
Thank you. Dr. Bruce Davidson?
Aye.
Dr. Mina Yoon?
Aye.
And Ms. Shirley Worrells? Thank you very much. Now we've got 6, and that moves. Thank you. So I think we have our budget analyst here today, and I know she wants to get back to work, so can we go to? Yeah, so can we go ahead and just move along to tab 4, the executive officer's update, and I will go ahead and allow our budget analyst to introduce herself and provide the budget update. Thanks, Sarah.
Good morning. My name is Sarah Hinkle. I'm from the DCA Budget Office. I'm happy to be here. I have good news, so just on a high level. We met with Rebecca earlier, and we went over, the budget for this upcoming, or for this year, and then upcoming, and we had discussed earlier, it was all good news. So makes it easier for me to present. The first item that's in your budget, or in the materials that was provided, is a budget summary. Looks like this. So basically, this is a one-page summary that displays all your changes to the current year and then also all the proposed budget year items. This document identifies base funding levels and the specific budget funding adjustments that affect both current and budget year. And they provide final budget totals for the proposed 2021. So if you want to read this, you read it from up to down and then from left to right. So we have your beginning current year, which is the 452 that you see, and this, we don't start from zero, but we start from prior year's ending budget. And then we have, there were no adjustments that were made last year, so we just, our budget act starts at 452, and then we have our, any baseline adjustments that were made, so this is your typical retirement, employee comps, those type of items. And then we get to, again, under current year, there were no other adjustments actually for that one, just annual, those are annual adjustments. And so we have your beginning budget as the 479 down at the bottom. So for the proposed budget year, again, we start with the 452 at the top, and then we've made any one-time costs that were backed out of your budget. These were your share of costs that are now being backed out. Then these were from prior year department-wide BCPs. And then again, we apply those same typical annual adjustments. Those are those employee retirement, employee comps, and so forth. And then you'll be happy to know that your pro rata, which is the department distributed costs, are going down. That's by 126,000, and we'll discuss that later also. And then we have our upcoming budget year DCA-wide BCPs that were proposed for this year. Those were items, again, that are your share, that are your program share of these BCPs. So again, we have your revised net appropriation as 358 for the upcoming budget year.
So the items that are minus,
Those are being backed out.
taking out of our budget.
Correct.
So will they continue on in the next year's budget after this?
They will not. Oh, they will not. So they're usually like one time.
So for us, what appears to be drastic reduction in the budget this year will not be the case next year, hopefully.
For which item?
Well, in the total, the revised appropriation, we're going from 479 to 358, largely because of $9,000 to Breeze and all these other things that were from prior years.
Correct. So those ones, so there are some items that are like a one-time cost, and then some of them are like a limited term, two-time cost. But once those are completed, it should be completed. And I believe that there are some that are just like a one-time that have been backed out, and that's going to be it. I can look further into that if you wanted to look.
Sarah, I can kind of answer
Okay.
that question for you. So most of that is coming from the $126,000 that we will be getting a credit for, and that was for the D of I costs for enforcement. We have not had as much go through D of I as we have in the past. There was a year, several years ago, that we really used D of I quite a bit, and there was a large sum that we were billed. And she'll get to the two-year roll forward program. They're kind of the way that they do things with the D of I, and that's just done so that we never have to stop going after doctors or unlicensed people that should be doing things other ways. And so if we don't have the money, we kind of get billed out 2 years. So right now, we're being credited, so we don't need that
And out of our
126. They're gonna
budget for
take it.
next year, but it's going into a credit in their department?
Yeah, and you'll see that later on in this
Yeah.
budget report.
Yes. Thank you. Were there any other questions on the budget summary?
So, I'm sorry, just to be clear on that, so that sort of implies that, so this represents sort of a correction, I guess. If in the future, it should be necessary to utilize the services of DOI more, again, there'll be a future correction to account for that, basically,
Correct.
so,
That's a great way to put it, yes.
okay, thanks.
Good word.
Yeah. A correction. Okay. So if there's no more questions, I can move on to the fund condition statement, which is the next item. Looks like this. So this document incorporates projected revenue for 1920 and the 2021 based on workload, expenditures, and revenue information prepared by your program. And it also incorporates your current and budget year budgets as reflected in the governor's budget. So again, you can imagine this as like a checking account. We have your beginning balance, and we have, again, top to bottom, right, and then left to right. So we have your beginning balance, any revenues that were collected or projected to be collected, minus any expenditures. And then, if I can note, for your specific under your expenditures under the first line, Department of Consumer Affairs 1111, these are the 1819 are the actual costs that were expended, and then the budget years going forward, so the next line, the next column's going over the 479, the 358, the 369, those are all your full budget appropriation. It does not include any savings that you historically revert. But after the pluses and the minuses, you have your months in reserves, which is like 10.2 for the current year, and that is a very comfortable spot to be in. Usually we recommend 3 to 6 months, but being at 10, like I said, it's good news for your program.
If I can just jump in, if you guys remember right, before the fee increase went into effect, we were looking at being insolvent come 21, 22. So with us having now 11 months in reserve at that month or that year, we're looking very healthy. So I'm glad to say that fee increase helped. I know everybody didn't care for it too much, but it definitely put us back into where we can continue business.
Correct. And basically what this months in reserves is how long your program can operate if it all of a sudden, for whatever reason, stopped collecting any revenues. So, again, it's good news. Are there any questions? Okay. So then the next item is your expenditure projections. Now, this is basically a monitor or a tool that I use in the budget office to monitor your current year budget to make sure that we don't overexpend on that. And what I do for this information is, these are your budget line items that but your program expends on. I use 3 years worth of historical information and also information from the program to be able to project what I anticipate you expending. So those first 3 columns are, again, historical spending. Then we have your governor's budget of what you're appropriated for this year. And then the next column, your current year expenditures. This expenditure report is taken as of fiscal month 5, which is as of November. So that's what I show your program has spent already. And then the next 2 columns over, the projections to year end, those are what I've anticipated, again, based on the historical spending and my conversations with Rebecca, and basically on what I anticipate you to expend through the end of the fiscal year. And then you can see your net appropriation down in the bottom right corner. That is what I anticipated, just like on a rough draft, really, of what I anticipate you to revert back to the fund.
Why are the governor's budget allotments for salary for the EO and staff so low?
Well, this is
I know, I
something-
sat through that entire meeting where everyone asked that question.
Yeah, this is something that we have to internally update in the budget office. I know it's something that we've talked about plenty of times, and other programs have seen the same concern, but it's something that we have to internally do, and then report it back. It's something that we have to work with SCO to be able to, I forget what the word we used to change, yeah. We had discussed it earlier in our budget meeting, but it's something that we are aware of and that we're working on to update. But we're all aware of that, and I know it's confusing sometimes, but.
I mean, if I'm reading this correctly, that puts us, at a significant deficit as far as salary, and then that's being compensated by the general expense budget? Is that what's happening here?
So, yeah, so it's not making us go over in the general budget, overall budget, but it is making us go over in that line item. So we have discussed it at this last budget meeting that I had with Sarah and her managers. And so I believe that they are going to take this and do whatever exercise they do in the budget office to go and reallocate those line items, so that we're not showing that we're overspending on certain line items. There's some of these line items that we don't even use, so we've got like $1,000 sitting somewhere, or $2,000 in another line that we will just go and take and kind of move around. So as long as that bottom line net appropriation doesn't go red, we're good, but I can see how it definitely gets confusing as why are we going over in this? So it is something that they are aware of and they will be taking care of. It's not something that we as the program can do.
Okay, great, thank you for that. And just to be clear, I'm not complaining at all about what you guys are actually getting paid, because I know you work very hard. I just was wondering why it started out with these numbers that seemed unrealistic.
So I have a question about the travel in-state line at 3,000.
Okay.
And we have felt that Rebecca hasn't had enough money to do the travel that she needs, and this may also have to do with board members traveling. Is that correct about
That
wherever
is,
it
and that's why the more teleconferences we can do, the better for us budget-wise, because it does, for each board or committee meeting that we have, flying people out or to Southern Cal, wherever we have the board meeting, it takes it out of our bottom line, and that is all we have for that. So, and you can see that only $3,200 is looking to be a reversion, so we don't have a lot to play with. So when we start going over for flights and hotels and meeting rooms and that kind of thing, it does, we have the ability to go over our line item and the overall budget.
So quick question, somewhat unrelated, which you can answer at your leisure. Is there any video conferencing option that is not just phone? Where we can see each other, or we can see a document together at the same time?
Yeah, we use WebEx, and we've used it for other meetings that we've had. It does get a little hard when having a teleconference meeting or a webcast meeting when you're not face-to-face, when you have a lot of stuff to go over and a lot of changes to do. Sometimes it is better to be face-to-face, but with the teleconferencing and stuff, it allows more public to be part of it. So, we take and give as much as we can, but when I start getting down to the nitty-gritty of that budget, that's when I say, okay, you guys, we got to really watch where we're traveling to.
I was just saying, if we use more of that, then that'll allow us not to have so many in-person meetings. Yeah.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, there's only a few things that a budget change proposal can be asked for, requested for, and I don't know that travel is one of them, is it?
To request more appropriation for that?
Because we have 3,000, and that was when we had 7 members. Now we have 9 members. Well, we will have 9 members when we're fully appointed, but.
I think that almost goes in line with Dara's initial comment about, being able to readjust or realign a lot of the budget line items, because
Sure.
you said even earlier that there is a line item in here that
Doesn't
you
get
probably don't
used.
even expend, that could possibly be moved into that. So that's a good question. I could,
Yeah, I think I've went through this, and I don't see anything except for those, but those are already being moved to other line items to take care of those deficits. So I don't know that we have too much to play with. I mean, obviously, if we only have $3,200 left at the end of the year to be reverted back, we really don't have. I mean, if something comes up and our copy machine goes on the fritz and we need a brand-new one, I mean, that blows it. Or if we have an AG enforcement case, that's going to blow $3,000 out of the water in one wash. I mean, so there is probably a need to request additional budget. But with that being said, once money is taken from here, it's hard to get it back unless it meets the Department of Finance's criteria for asking for more money. So I will check to see if travel is one of those items, and maybe we can justify it because at one time when they only gave us that much, we only had 7 members. We weren't doing a whole lot, but now we've got 9 members. 2 of them right now are from SoCal. I don't know what the other 2, once they're appointed, where they're going to be from. So it is very possible that that's going to go up, and we may use that 3,200 by the end of the year. So
If the Department of Consumer Affairs were to maintain a video conference site in Southern California, it would save all the boards a ton of money because we all have to scramble around and pay way more money than we should. They could even have it staffed with a single technical person to kind of help open the doors and keep things running. Has that ever been discussed? Do you know?
not to my knowledge, but I know that we have other state buildings and state departments that are down there. Actually, we've discussed it with a couple that would allow us to go down and use their facilities if needed. So we do have some other options. We just have to know where we're going to be in advance so that we have a lead time.
Well, pass it
that
on,
will
would
allow
you?
that.
Pass it on up to the DCA chain. Just say a board member thought that it would save us all a lot of money.
We would.
Yeah.
Along those lines also, I wonder the extent, I had the impression initially, starting my role here, that there was some priority to trying to make sure that people all over the state, citizens all over the state have the opportunity to be involved. And that would imply the prioritization of the ability to have meetings outside of Sacramento, which requires travel. So it seems like there's maybe a relationship to that aspect of the.
You're absolutely correct. Right now, the only reason that we haven't had more Southern California is because we have more people coming from NorCal, so it would be substantially increased in our travel to go down to SoCal right now. However, in a perfect world, if I had the budget for it, we would definitely be going down there because I love their weather better than here, so.
Well, and that speaks, I think, to us, but then just the population of the state.
Sure.
I mean, I guess in principle, I mean, not that we get a lot of public participation that I've observed, but it ought to be an option.
It should,
Yeah.
absolutely. I agree.
okay. If no more questions on that, I'll move on to the revenue projection. This document is similar to the expenditure projection, except I am now projecting for your revenues of what your committee has been collecting. And this is also information as for the first 5 months of the fiscal year. So these just show the first column shows the category line items that, the fees and the revenue that you collect, and then again, what you've collected for the first 5 months. So for this document, I show that you've collected the 245,000, and then what I've projected toward the end of the fiscal year is down at the bottom, the 588. And now this is, it's a little more than what you've historically collected, but that's okay. This is, again, it's just a projection. If your board, if your committee continues to collect that same amount of money every single month, this is what I project you. But of course, we know that things can change and for whatever reason, but it's a good place to be in. It's something that I'll continue to monitor and discuss with Rebecca to make sure that we're still on target with the committee's goals But overall, the revenue is good, and it's in line with what you've anticipated to be collecting for this fiscal year.
Can you remind us, month one, is that like October or?
July, is that what you're?
So this is July of 2019?
Yeah, so
Yes.
that's the fiscal year, the beginning of the fiscal year. So this is, like I said, through November, so July, August.
Okay.
Yeah, November.
And yeah, you will definitely notice that the 588,000 is quite a bit more than we have historically collected in revenue. And if you guys will remember right, prior to the increase in fees, we were imbalanced by about $150,000 a year. So this here pretty much makes up that difference. It would have totally made up the difference. However, there were some increases last year for pro rata, so that kind of ate into that. And however, we are seeing the savings in D of I costs this year, so it kind of helped. So that 588 is definitely going to be helpful. And if we continue on this way, I think we'll be fine. I really do, so.
Are there any questions?
Rebecca, just clarification, the other regulatory license and permits, is that like the initial licensure?
Yes, well, that and any facility, so faculty registration that we may give. I know Bastyr hasn't been using it, I wish they would, but, so we also have a faculty registration. So basically, it's kind of like a temporary license for any faculty that's going to be working at Bastyr. So if they just graduated and they're going to be doing a faculty position at Bastyr, instead of going through the whole licensure, because sometimes, I mean, they could be getting it in July when everybody else is getting their stuff in applicant-wise or application-wise. So in order to put them kind of up at the top, we do have a faculty registration that they're supposed to be using. They don't. But yeah, there's other things. We're also going to be having like the inactive fee and that kind of thing. So there are some other license types, I guess, if you will, that we have under that.
Are there any other questions regarding the revenue projection? Okay, so then I will move on to the DOI 2-year roll forward. Okay, so just let me, put out that it's a really difficult chart to explain and also just to comprehend even for myself. So I'm going to do my best and step in, Rebecca, if I.
We promise not to throw fruit at you or anything.
Okay, thank you. So this chart displays your your committee's historical division of investigation service expenditures, and we just completed the 2018-19, which is 2 years ago. So if you want to follow me, I could kind of walk this through you for with the 2018-19 column. But we show what the hourly rate was for the DOI, and then the 6425, that is how many hours your DOI was spent on the committee's cases. And then the 98,000, that's your budget that was appropriated for you, and this was built in or projected 2 years ago. And then the actual cost, so of that 98,000, the committee's only spent 19,000. But we charged you the 91,000, because that's what we had anticipated. So as you can see, we owe the committee 71,000 there. But if we calculate what was assessed 2 years prior to that, which is the 39, that's what you owed, that's what the committee owed us, we now get a credit, or a credit of 32 that gets rolled over 2 years later. So that won't be owed until 2021.
I think that means you still owe us 32 rather than 71.
Correct. And this keeps rolling over, but it keeps rolling 2 years over and over, taking into account that 2-year roll forward. So if you see in 2021, if you jump over 2 columns, by that time, we don't anticipate the committee using the DOI based upon your trend. So that's why by that time, it looks like we'll be owing you a credit. So we didn't calculate, or we didn't assess a budget for you at that time. So that's something that Rebecca was mentioning earlier, how reliance on DOI seems to be trending down.
And we won't need them because everyone's going to be shipshape and practice perfectly
We're
with no
hoping.
problems.
So I think what it is, when this first happened, there was a big need of D of I stepping in and doing what staff from the NMC would have normally have done, but it was when Breeze was being developed, and so the one person, the one and only staff that NMC had at the time was diverted to go over to Breeze and do UAT testing, and they were only in the office one day a week. So we were not able to take care of all of the administrative enforcement stuff that we normally would have done. So what happened was D of I came in and did a lot of hours that they normally would not have had to do, and we got billed for it. So it took us 3 years to start paying that down because we didn't have that money then, and they don't take it from you then, they take it 2 years later, right? So it just kind of moves forward after that, and that just allows a program to never have to stop going after enforcement. And so this was the way that DCA came up with a solution so that programs could still do what they needed to do to keep consumers safe. So yes, we do have a tick going down. We don't have 200 cases anymore. We typically have between 50 and 60 a year. So we do see that it's going down. And I think that maybe some of the unlicensed people are starting to get, the word out that, oh, they're going to go after you. So they're trying to stay clear of us.
Yes. Hopefully that chart helps a lot. Were there any questions regarding to your? Okay.
You did a great job explaining
you.
it.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
See you next time.
All right, and I can go ahead and keep on going. So if you go to page 31, you'll see our license statistic updates. So our current active status in state and out of state is 840 currently. Current inactive status, we've got 18 licensees who are in an inactive status, probably in another state, and they're just keeping their license here active but don't want to have to do the CE. Delinquent statuses, so this is any licensee that has not had their license canceled, so it can be delinquent for 3 years before we go in there and automatically cancel them. Then they have to reapply all over again. There are 159 that are in this status right now. Withdrawn or canceled, this year there was 116 that moved from that delinquent to the 3-year mark, and they're out of there. So currently under our jurisdiction, and this would be any current in-state or out-of-state, any inactive and any delinquent statuses, we have 1,017 of those under our purview right now. Any que-
Do any outreach to this 159 to?
So they get a delinquent renewal notice for the first year, 30 days after. They also get one the second year. If they don't come back after that, we do not continue beating on their door. We just don't have the staff or resources for that, unfortunately.
Along those lines, are they allowed to continue to practice while they're in delinquent status?
No, they are not. And that's why they're under our jurisdiction, because if they are caught, we go after them. Yep. All right. Any other questions on that one? All right. It is, however, trending up, because when I first started, there was only, I think, 497 licensees. So we're doing a good job, and that was 6 years ago, so. All right. And page 32 is just the license population status that I pulled from Breeze. So it's just exactly what that was, just easier to read on the other page. All right. Page 34 is our NMC enforcement update. The committee continues to remain diligent in investigating all cases that are reported to us. Currently, there are 60 open cases in all stages of the enforcement process, and below are the breakdowns of the complaint types currently pending. We've got 42 of those 60 cases are unlicensed activity, which is 70% of our enforcement type. The cases against licensees are 16. That's 26.6%. And cases against applicants, there's 2 pending. As of 1/24, there were 2 pending. And that's 3.4. Applicants It can be that they stated that they had had a prior DUI or something, or that there was something from another state that we have to look into before licensing them. Page 35 just breaks down what those cases are against actual licensees. So of those 18 cases against licensees, we've got 8 that are for advertising, 1 for a failure to update an address, 3 for DUI-related violations, 4 for unprofessional practice, and death or patient harm is 2. And you can see the percentages.
And this, we don't have numbers for, what do you call it when it's decided against them, a conviction?
I'm sorry?
So these are cases, meaning alleged,
Mhm.
not necessarily decided that they're at fault or a problem yet.
Correct. These are open investigations. They have not been closed, so there has been no decision made on these. These are just in process right now.
Okay. And do we have, what do you call it if they receive a judgment against them?
So currently, we've got 2, I'm sorry, and I could have put that in here. Currently, we've got 2 parties that are on probation, if you will. And so those are the only 2 cases that have ever been taken against a naturopathic doctor here in California. It's 2.
That's very helpful to know ongoing, because in legislative efforts, especially by the association, when we talk about the safety, when the safety gets challenged, it's good to have those figures so that we
Sure.
can be clear. Thank you.
Yep, I will add that to it.
So I have a question about this as well.
Sure.
Page 35, I appreciate the categorization, and I guess that raises the question in my mind of whether there's any prioritization applied to, in a situation of limited resources, to following up on one or another of these categories. I mean, it would seem as though, death or patient harm, for example, might be a category that would end up being prioritized for the application of resources to follow through, and I don't know whether that's the case.
So what I can do is, and I know we've had this in the past, and maybe we haven't kind of revisited it since you've been on board, but I will bring the DFI prioritization list, and it kind of shows how we need to prioritize something. So, of course, something that comes in that is death or severe patient harm, we're going to take that precedence over an advertising, somebody that's just advertising a vitamin B shot clinic or something. So absolutely, we do prioritize those. A lot of these, once we intake them and decide, yes, we need to take some action on it, it goes over to DFI. So then they go back to their list of what needs to go high and low in their prioritization.
Okay, that'd be helpful.
I sure will bring that
Yeah,
up to you
it would be
guys.
to see that. And then I guess the follow-up question for me would be, and I remember seeing a statistic like this when we were looking at statistics for the strategic plan. I think there was somewhere, maybe you sent to me or I found online, sort of the timeframes, how long each of these things is taking in their various stages, right? So, again, along those lines, presumably the highly prioritized category of death or patient harm would be one where we might see a statistic that shows the follow-up to be timely.
Yeah,
More
so
timely than advertising.
Yeah, so
issue.
actually, those usually take more time because they're so complex, especially when it has a patient death or a patient harm in it. So once we get it, I mean, the committee always has the option, if it falls in the right criteria, that we can go and take action and get maybe like gosh, I can't remember what it's called, but an interim suspension order where we can get them out of there if we think that they are a threat to the public. If there is a patient harm and we're just not sure kind of where that fault lies, then we really have to go and investigate it. If we don't think that maybe the doctor did anything and we need to really kind of go and look at it, then I mean, there's certain criteria that the AG or the district attorney's office allows to go in and take somebody's license. So of course, due process comes into play, but these things can take anywhere from a couple months to several years. And, we have a 3-year statute of limitations. So we do get things done within that time. We don't lose statute. I keep an eye on when that is going to be lost. And so we make sure that it gets filed with the AG if we need to before that happens. And that, just to answer your question, that is in the annual statistic reports of the performance measures, and that's all online under DCA. Once we redo our website, I think the link is going to be on our website as well for those
Good, okay.
performance
And
measures.
then I guess I'm also thinking about this in terms of our ongoing discussions about approaching the legislature for scope expansion within the framework of the statute. And while there's a fairly small number here, these are the kinds of things that lend themselves to dramatic stories. And I know I've seen articles out there which focus in on those kind of concerns about the degree to which there's safe practice. And somehow or another, I think that is relevant to our desire to be able to, in terms of the strategic plan, that particular one that we talked about, is to inform and educate, legislators about the practice of naturopathic medicine. And I guess where I'm going with this is to be able to have a way of talking about this that mitigates the any perceived problems.
Absolutely. And, anytime that we have a scope expansion or scope modernization, or anytime we go and ask for our scope to be looked at to allow practice as trained, we always bring these stats. And for us to have only taken action against 2 licensees in 15 years of licensing, that is extremely, extremely low. You will not see that in any other program under the Department of Consumer Affairs. I've already checked that. You look at the medical board or any other program that has doctors, or, they're going to have extremely high numbers. So we are, in the terms of kind of the overall professional licensing for health providers, I think we are one of the lowest. And that kind of goes across nationwide as well.
So that kind of comparison, the proportional comparison compared to other boards and their oversight of other, slices of the health profession, may well be important for us in terms of our ability to talk to legislators about, the validity and justification for scope expansion too.
Sure. So, yeah, we can actually, I can get some of this information, I'm sure, from other programs, just off of their annual reports from the prior year, and just kind of see where they were in terms of enforcement and, what they paid in enforcement, and then kind of where we are in terms of that. So we can definitely get something like that as we move forward.
Make important talking points.
Sure. I forget you're my data guy.
So just a question as well, on page 34, there's 16 cases against licensees that are open, and then the following page, 35, they say there's 18.
Oh, sorry, I think there was 18. So that's my mistake. I think I hit the wrong key. It is 18. So I must have gotten that wrong. I will check those and send them back out to you
Okay,
guys.
just
but-
because the numbers are
Yeah, it
pretty
didn't
small,
add
so
up.
it's going to change the statistics
Sure.
on all of those.
So this page 35 is the accurate breakdown of the licensee stats. So I will definitely go back and check those cases. Were there any other questions on the stats? Okay. All right, and I have a regulatory update. So this is just for the, if you guys remember right, the substantial relationship and rehabilitation, which was the AB 2138 that all of the licensing, healing arts, and I believe other programs had to do as well. I know that all of the healing arts boards were kind of kicking their feet about this, but it is what it is. So we have got that package done, completed back in April. It was just approved, I guess, if you will, by Department of Consumer Affairs and sent over to agency. Agency has 30 days to make their comments and either send it on to Department of Finance, correct, or back to us. And that was sent over to agency on the 13th of January. So hopefully within that 30 days, we will hear. But if anybody is curious as to what that regulation package looks like, I brought the public file so you can take a look at that before you go if you'd like to. And that was just that update. All right, and I don't have anything else there. But thank you guys for all getting your training done. I appreciate it.
May I ask one more question about the chart on page 35?
Sure.
What are the sorts of things that fall into unprofessional practice?
So unprofessional conduct or unprofessional practice would be maybe not releasing medical records when requested, or if there was a licensee that worked for another practice as maybe a contractor, and they decide to leave and then start going and getting all the patients, that's another kind of unprofessional practice. So those are things that are turned into us. Another one could be having a relationship with somebody in the office. There's just all these different things. So it's just kind of anything that isn't advertising or failure to update an address or death, that kind of thing, or substance abuse is under unprofessional practice.
Do we have on the website and the sheet that we send out with every license renewal, or has there been any communication about advertising what's allowed and what's not allowed?
So that's under the general Business and Professions Code. It's, I think, Section 800. And that whole section talks about what medical doctors, any kind of doctors, are allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do in terms of advertising. It can't be false. It can't be misleading. You can't be a, let's say, physician and then have a practice called naturopathic, whatever. I mean, like, it has to be factual. Like, you
said
for
something
advertising.
in the example earlier about B12 shot bars. or
Yeah, so
something.
there are people that do like happy hours, so they only give a discounted price during a certain time, and it's not for everybody, can't have that type of price. So there's certain things in there, and it's very specific, and it breaks it down, and it's a large section in the Business and
Not the
Professions
fact that
Code.
they're doing the shots, it's the fact that they have different prices at different times for different people.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you,
Anything else with that?
Rebecca.
Yes.
I had a question regarding our schedule for today.
Okay.
So I want to make sure that everyone gets a break to use the bathroom, and I don't know when we're breaking for lunch. And also, I see two people here, and I don't want to keep them too long, and I'm wondering who they're representing.
Sure.
Yeah.
So we have Kathy Const, who is the Executive Officer or Executive Director of the CNDA. So, hi, Kathy. And she was nice enough to come and visit with us today to kind of provide an update to you guys on kind of where they are right now. I believe lobbyists are coming around what time? 12:30. They're going to come and just kind of do a meet and greet with you guys during the lunch break. Brianna Miller is here from DCA. She's just a representative, just in case there were any questions, or she's just kind of taking notes and doing her thing back there. So, hi, Brianna. So that's all that's here. But if you guys would like to take a couple minutes to break.
I think if we're planning to do lunch at 12:30, we should probably take a bathroom break now.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay.
And then can everyone be back by 11:30? That's in 7 minutes.
Okay, that sounds good. Everybody remember?
Okay, great. All right, we are back, and I just discussed order of agenda items with Rebecca, and we are going to, just because it'll fit into the time slot a little bit better, we're going to move on to item 8, which is discussion and possible action regarding the intravenous IV and injection therapy subcommittee recommendations. I'm just going to give a brief overview of this, as I was the chair of that subcommittee. So we have finalized our recommendations regarding regulatory changes for IV and injection therapies. Sabina has gone through those and edited them legally, and we have final language here for the committee to hear and decide if we want to approve those and put them forward as a regulatory change. Okay. So that, sorry, I don't have the page number on that.
It starts on page 49.
Okay. So have people had a chance to look through these? They're not particularly long, so it may benefit us just to read through them and make sure there are no issues with clarification or questions about them. All right. So moving forward with that.
Sorry, can I ask a
Yes.
question?
Yeah.
Just with the education at the naturopathic colleges, is there like a certification that goes through some of the schools?
So right now, there's currently 2 schools that have been approved by the committee that meet the basic IV requirement. And then there's one other one that is not a school that does provide the training and certification for that.
Which schools?
Bastyr and, who's the other? NCNM? And UNM, I'm sorry. That's right, they're no longer a college, they're, university.
And I guess the rest will work on it?
The rest, and Dr. Thompson will go through that, but
I can address that, actually. It's part of our regulations. So this is divided up into sections. The first section, 4237.1, and this is Article 6, the practice of naturopathic medicine, training and requirements for certification intravenous therapies. In order to perform intravenous IV therapies, a naturopathic doctor must comply with the following: appropriate certification in basic IV therapies from a provider approved by the committee as outlined in section 3640.8 of the code. Now, I just want to answer that question, which is that we are going to need to come up with a subcommittee which will approve providers, because many of these new regulations require the training to be done by a provider approved by the committee. So that's an extra chunk of work that we're going to have over the next couple years to get those providers approved. Once we have several in place, it shouldn't be as much ongoing work, but that is something that right now the only thing we have set up for that is the approval of the basic IV therapies and a structure for the approval of chelation therapy. We don't have the other providers approved yet, and so if we're going to put this into regulation and require that our licensees have that training, we need to have those providers available to them. And Rebecca and I had also discussed providing, and we can discuss this as a committee, a 1-year grace period for people to come into compliance who are already performing that therapy in their office. Okay. Recertification is required every 5 years and thereafter. I don't know how many of our licensees are actually aware of this or doing it, but we're just being very clear that we do need to recertify to keep up to date. Recertification must include all of the following: a review of admixtures from the initial certification training and all new admixtures that are available, manufactured and/or compounded, that are chemically independent of any other previously manufactured or compounded agents. Appropriate diagnosis, dosing, and infusion times for all admixtures, safety and known side effects for IV nutritional therapy, and appropriate lab testing prior to or during treatment.
Is part of the the safety item, an update on the changing regulations for the facility?
So this doesn't specifically address that, and in the regulations, we were very clear not to put any specifics of current law because so much is in flux. We just would refer in the places where it was appropriate to licensees needing to be in compliance with current law. So it is their responsibility to understand the current laws and stay in compliance with them. Because if we put something in here that is true for the current law and then it changes, then we're going to have to go back and change it in regulation. We don't want to have to do that. So we're also, certification in cardiopulmonary resuscitation is required for all naturopathic doctors performing this therapy, and advanced cardiac life support, ACLS certification, is required for all doctors performing this therapy. So this is for basic IV therapy. We are requiring both CPR and ACLS certification.
So I had a question on that. We took our whole office through CPR training this year, and I signed up for ACLS, and then I got halfway through it and said, oh, wait a second, this is like way too much. I don't need this, because there's actually quite a few drugs involved. I think dopamine is one of them, and there's others that in advanced cardiovascular life support, the person would need to have currently a physician protocol agreement in order to administer those, even in an emergency situation.
Well, I mean, I still think that the training is valuable, and you don't need to use every aspect of it. And there are many doctors performing IV therapy that have a supervision agreement with an MD and would have access
Okay.
to those
Because
medications.
this really teaches you how to run a code with a team.
What was that?
This teaches you how to run a code with a team, meaning some, where you have a crash cart and you have several people with different duties and you're supervising that. Like, it's pretty, yeah. I don't know if you guys had looked into it, but it's very, very comprehensive.
We have
We
several.
did, actually.
Yeah, I was going to
Okay.
say, we have several licensees that actually just do it for CE credit, so, yeah.
I mean, we looked into it, we know it's extensive, but we're trying to make sure we maintain the public safety and also meet the concerns about safety regarding IV therapy. And when we looked into it, we determined that the training is not prohibitively long or expensive for our licensees. So even if there are things that they can't actually apply, I think it is valuable.
Is there any tracking from the NMC of who has the certification and able to do that IVs?
So currently, we do, it's on the application checklist. So we go through their transcripts right now, and we determine whether they have met that requirement for the basic, and then we put it on their sheet. So right now, we are tracking it that way. However, once we get into doing the certification, we're going to have an application that they can do and apply for it. And that way we can actually put it into the system. We currently are working with the Breeze team to have that added so that it will be on the license. And that I know has been something that the pharmacists have been wanting, because they don't know who's allowed to get the IV therapy stuff and who isn't. So this is going to help when they go in and try to order.
Okay, and any thought to displaying the certification at an IV clinic or?
We hadn't any thought of that, but I think it's an excellent idea, because we want, there's so many injection therapies available in California. We want the consumers to know which ones are safe. And so having a certificate would, I think, be really valuable.
And as soon as we actually have a wall cert that we can put that on, so it'll be their regular license wall certificate. So if an ND is practicing at 2 locations, they're going to have one in one location and one in location B. And if they're IV therapy certified, that certification will be on there as well, showing that they are able to do it. And as soon as this recommendation is approved by you guys and it starts moving forward in the regulatory process, we will start working with Breeze to get those done.
So Rebecca and I had discussed the sort of time that it takes for a regulatory package to reach final approval, and that gives us about a year to put all of these things into place before the regulations would go into effect. So we can start approving providers ahead of time. We can get the certification, specifics in place, et cetera. But again, that's going to be a lot of front-loaded work for us to do, but it should be stuff that we don't have to redo year after year. Is everyone ready to move on to section 4237.2? This is training requirements for certification injection therapy. So the first section was regarding basic IV therapy, and this section is regarding the more advanced injection therapies that questions kept coming up about, and so we put in specific regulations to address those. And there is a clause in here, you'll see that, we may need to add to this section in the future as newer therapies come up. I've actually had questions about a couple already since we finished this. I'm like, no. So anyways, in order to perform injection therapies, a naturopathic doctor must meet certification requirements in section 4237.1. So you can't go and do these advanced injection therapies unless you are already certified for IV therapy. So that is the foundation. So in addition, a naturopathic doctor must have additional training for the following advanced injection therapies listed in this section. Recertification for these advanced therapies is required every 5 years. Supplemental training must be obtained for new techniques, agents, or admixtures as they are introduced into the human market. So that's the little clause saying that we may add more things. So number one, for the use of EDTA, DMPS, and DMSA, and any other known chelating agents, a naturopathic doctor must have an additional 12 hours of training for both oral and IV chelation. Now, this is the only time we mention an oral agent except for in the emergency section, but the truth is that for chelation, the training is done as one for both oral and IV agents, so it seemed appropriate to list it that way. 12 hours of IV and oral chelation therapies by continuing education provider approved by the committee as outlined in 3635 and 3635.2 of the section.
Is this actually regulating their ability to use oral chelation?
It's saying that you need to be appropriately trained or you cannot use oral chelation, that you must have chelation training prior to doing it.
But is it saying I have to have IV training to do oral chelation therapy?
It says you have to have gone through a chelation training, which will likely include both IV and oral because of what's available in the market.
But if you can't take the injection training without having done the IV training, then you've got to do both to prescribe oral.
That is a really important point. So I don't know of any training that's currently offered that is training for oral chelation alone without having the IV component.
Well, this is something I feel thoroughly trained in at school, oral chelation, its risks, its benefits, and it's a very different animal than IV chelation.
True.
So I don't think they should be lumped together. I think they should be separate. I don't think you should hinge being able to do oral chelation, which we're already trained to do and do safely, to the whole IV training, because somebody can certainly do oral chelation in their office without having to learn how to do IVs extra.
I agree, and I think it also inhibits laboratory testing abilities as well.
So, yeah, I hear that concern. I'm just trying to figure out how to, we could certainly just take the oral out of this since this is an injection therapy regulation, but I think we may need to come back as a committee and address oral chelation. Currently, it is covered under the supervising doctor provision of our law, because you're not going to be able to do oral chelation without a supervisory relationship because it's prescription medication. So I think that we could certainly remove that. And then we just may have to revisit it with the formulary subcommittee. Makes sense to me.
So just cross out and oral.
Yes. Which means we probably should take DMSA off because it is not available IV to my knowledge.
So are you wanting to strike the blueprint that the council came up with?
Right.
Because this is the blueprint that every single school goes off of.
Right. See, that's
So-
the problem, is that the oral chelation is included in the chelation blueprint.
What does that mean, chelation blueprint?
So the training that is given at the schools for chelation,
It's chelation training content.
do you see the
blueprint.
chart that's
Having
here?
that blueprint prepares them for both. And where we regulate them is in two different places, but they still can be prepared for both. Are you saying that we've set up, if you have the blueprint that the schools are following and it's offered as optional, that they would remove oral chelation training from the rest of their curriculum and then people wouldn't be qualified anymore if they didn't do the
Well,
additional thing?
Did you learn oral chelation separate from being trained with other chelating agents?
So-
Right, I mean, it's an inclusive training. That's what we're bumping up against, is that people are trained to chelate as one, and, I mean, I understand that the use of oral chelation and the use of IV chelation has a totally different risk profile, but we're talking about training requirements here, and so how are we going to set this up such that it actually works with how the schools are teaching currently?
Could we just have a separate line for oral and address that in particular? In terms of if the school requirements will cover oral, and then the additional bump in education requirement for IV, then that would satisfy both parties, I think, or both sides of the argument.
My question is, are the schools covering oral chelation in a separate area of their curriculum other than the chelation training that the schools are currently offering, which includes IV agents? I mean, I understand the concern of graduates who left naturopathic school when the training was different, but we also have to deal with the blueprints that are being used by the schools now. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because one of the things we need to do as a committee is we need to certify providers for this, and the schools are going to be potentially some of those providers, and they're using this blueprint, which includes oral chelation. So if we take oral chelation out, then it affects the blueprint. And so, I mean,
I just don't
we
want
may
it
need
to exclude their ability to do it elsewhere.
right, I understand, but I
If
think
it's included in the
that,
training, it's not a problem. It's whether it's a recertification or whether it's done in school, it doesn't really matter functionally where you get it, as long as you get it.
right.
I just don't want it regulated out of practice for people who don't do IVs.
Yes, I understand your
oral,
concern.
yeah.
I'm just trying to figure out what's the best way to word it. And if we need to, I mean, it seems like it could be something as simple as removing it from section 1, where it says, for the use of these agents, this training is required, but still leaving it in the blueprint for the training. But Rebecca's giving me a look like that's not
No,
so good.
because that's actually part of the total hours that's in that chelation blueprint. So this is currently what is being offered in the schools. So when they teach chelation, there's at least 12 hours that they're training on for these chelating agents. And this is what was given to the legislature back in 2005 when the ask was presented to allow NDs to perform these types of treatments.
What if we took out DMSA in this paragraph, but left in and oral? I mean, in a sense, if you're doing IV chelation, you want to be fully aware of what the oral options are, so that you can tailor the needs of the patient and the risk level and so forth. So if we say for the use of these agents, well, it says and any other known chelating, you should say and any other known IV chelating agents. Then you wouldn't be excluding the use of the oral, but you would still be training them in this training on the oral, and it would stay in the blueprint.
I mean,
So if you took out DMSA and said, and any other known IV chelating agents, a naturopathic doctor must have an additional 12 hours of training for IV and oral chelation therapies by a continuing education provider.
I mean, we can always take it out and put another section in here for oral chelation and keep it in with this, and then it's still there. And they'd have to have another certification for the oral chelation, but it's all part of, so last year, we were contacted by the San Diego District Attorney's Office saying that we need regulations on this stuff, and they were extremely, anyway, they really wanted this to happen.
And that was an IV
So,
question.
It was, but we've got other questions on just the whole chelation in general. So we want to make sure that we are kind of taking a look at everything as a whole. Now, whether it needs to be in here for injection, for the advanced injection therapy, I see what you're saying, but it still needs to be a requirement for the oral chelation because it does, I mean, it takes a requirement, a training requirement.
so I think what the question we have here is, does it take an additional training requirement over the normal training in pharmacology to use an oral agent? Or is that simply a pharmacology issue? Because the chelating agents were not, at least when we did our exclusionary formulary, the chelating agents were not excluded, nor are they controlled. I think that there are two issues coming up here. The first is that this is really only an issue for people who are older graduates. This is not an issue that's coming up for people who are new graduates from the schools.
Yeah.
So we have to look at the potential of grandfathering people and not,
It is actually potentially an issue if it's optional. If it's not optional, it's not an issue for the first 5 years, but then every student will then, if they want to be doing, even just to ascertain if a patient has heavy metal toxicity, you have to use a chelate agent oral. And so they will, just to do regular practice, they now have the burden of recertifying every 5 years for one substance out of the entire medicine, all pharmacology. And it's not nearly even as dangerous as some of the other stuff that we can use. So it doesn't really make sense from that point of view.
well, at least when we looked at the injection therapy, we had talked about recertification exams for that as well.
Yes.
And I think that, I think that's something we have to look at as a committee is how do we show that there is actually going to be patient safety without requiring some sort of recertification on pharmacology. But that's not really the topic that we're talking about right now. We're just talking about if we need to include DMSA in this section. I certainly, and this comes from the perspective of someone who is extensively trained and uses both IV and oral chelation, I certainly think that the oral chelating agents need to be included in the IV chelation training because they are often used in combination. So you cannot train for IV chelation without training for oral chelation. It would be unsafe and inappropriate. But I also hear what Greta's saying, which is that it is possible to use the oral chelating agents independently of any injection therapies, and that the use of that is different and is inherently safer.
So
for the
maybe
consumer.
we just add a item at the end here saying that the use of oral chelation independently of IV chelation does not require additional training or certification. With
And
that.
also, I mean, the edits that Greta mentioned, which was in section 1 to take DMSA out and say any other known IV chelating agents, I think would address that issue from a legal standpoint, but we could still leave the blueprint intact because, as I said, you can't do the training for the IV agents without doing the training for the oral agents.
Sure. And I can tell you, if it makes you feel any better, about, I would say 95% of the newer graduates that are coming out of at least Bastyr are all IV therapy. They've met that requirement, the basic requirement.
Yeah, but we've got a few other schools that aren't yet.
That is true. There's only one other school.
And we're talking about also recertification every 5 years. That's on
So,
top of all the other training requirements.
I can tell
we
you
have.
that the reason that came into play is because we want to make sure that the NDs remain competent in it, because you can, let's say, go out of practice for 2 years, you wanted to take, I don't know, time off to be with the family or go wherever, and then you come back and you want to take up IV therapy again. We just need to make sure that you have kept up on all of the new whatever may come into play at that time.
So what, is there a provision if a person becomes certified through going to school, but they don't renew in 5 years because they don't think they're going to do IV
They don't use
therapy or
it?
whatever, and then they want to do it again after
Mm-hmm.
7 years,
So they
They
just have
would
to
then
go on
have
and
to
take the
take the class
recertification.
at that point,
the recertification or the original certification?
the recertification.
The research, because once you've taken, so say somebody has taken the basic IV therapy, that's never going to go away. It's always going to be on the transcript. You've taken that basic, and then you just have to go and recertify to show that you still remember it all.
Okay, so what if we just cross out and oral
Where are we?
on B1?
Okay.
So we cross out DMSA and any other known IV chelating agents. A naturopathic doctor must have an additional 12 hours of training for IV chelation. And then in the breakdown of the 12, we should put oral options to IV chelation or combo. Mention that as part of the training, but leave it out of the initial paragraph saying that they must do this in order to use it.
I think we can leave the blueprint as it is because that's the one that's not something we made up. That's something we actually received from the schools. That is their
Perfect.
blueprint.
Okay.
So I don't
you're
think we need to edit that in any way.
Okay, but you're okay taking the and oral out of the
Yes.
number
Yes.
one? Okay.
And then if you guys really want to make it to where it's very clear that oral chelation isn't part of the certification, then we can just add that one little blurb at the end of this.
I think if we take those words out, it is clear. I mean, we can read the wording again, but again, including the training with oral agents in an IV training is appropriate, just like, when we do IVs, we do all sorts of things. We have people take fiber, for example, because it binds, things that are mobilized. We have them do all sorts of oral stuff along with it. It's
Right.
not,
Okay.
it can be part of the training as how to do it safely. But I do just want to say, I don't personally think that DMSA requires any additional scrutiny over other prescription medications, but I do think that we do have to consider as a committee the ongoing knowledge and certification of pharmacology. We currently require of our licensees, a certain number of pharmacology CEs, but they are very non-specific. And so it may be that when we move forward with the formulary subcommittee, that there has to be more specificity on the classes of drugs that are in the training in order to ensure safety in that scenario.
Well, I'll just say on behalf of, medical doctors who only need to do, I think, 50 hours over 2 years without any specifics in pharmacology, I think the idea is that it's left to the individual practitioner to make sure they're studying the things that they're actually doing so that they're competent. And that's sort of an overriding principle in practice. And so does every little tiny thing need to be specifically outlined about what we do? Because we are hyper-regulated compared to other healthcare professions, and that we have a certain number of hours designated for pharmacology is already a, what do you call it? It was it was imposed in order to alleviate concerns of safety, but it's a solution to a problem that doesn't currently exist. So why do we even want to be more specifically trying to solve problems that don't exist when they don't exist? Why don't we wait until it's actually a problem if it ever does become one?
Are you talking about the oral chelation?
I'm talking about just in principle,
I think she's talking about,
specifying certain categories that
So
people have to train
unfortunately,
in.
that's in statute. If you want to change that, you have to go to the legislature and ask for that to
So
be
that's a moot
changed.
point
So,
then.
right,
and
right.
that's
So
why
the-
we're clarifying in regulations, because the one place that you can clarify our statute is here. So if you guys want to make those requirements here, this
I'm
is the
just-
only place you
I
can
was
do
just,
it without.
I was just arguing against the idea that we would ever need to specify certain agents, that we have certain number of hours in pharmacology. But like you said, that's a legislative issue, so.
I mean, I think it's a topic that we do need to discuss, but it is kind of off topic of what we're discussing, so, and I'm the one who brought us off topic, so I apologize. Anyways, so is everyone okay with the changes in that language? Because it'd be great if we could approve these regulations today. That we are removing DMSA from section B1, and that we are removing oral chelation from that, and we are saying other known IV chelating agents.
And what was the last part?
Other known.
Other known IV chelating agents.
Okay, I got you.
I also have one edit in that same section. The last word in B1 should be the word code instead of the section.
Oh,
Should be.
thank you.
And there's a similar correction in the next section as well, be capital C.
Okay.
And then and then a question on 2, do we keep the blueprint as is or also remove the DMSA?
We are keeping the blueprint as is because it's what currently is offered by the school and by the other training agencies that are giving training. And as I said, the training in IV chelation therapy without the oral agents seems unsafe and inappropriate. Yeah.
I'd like to make a suggestion that in A, we say, in order to perform certain injection therapies as noted below, because injection therapies could include B12 or other very safe things that are not specified in this document, that we don't want to say now you can't do anything by injection unless it's listed here.
So you want to say something like, in order to perform the following specialized injection therapies or something along those lines?
Mhm.
What do you think about that, Sabina?
Sorry, can you repeat that? Greta?
In order to perform certain injection therapies as outlined below, or.
I like the word specialized, but only if it means something in your world.
It does not. That's random. It's random.
So would we know as, like, if IV therapy for dummies, like, someone like me, would that create enough guidance for someone coming to this section knowing?
No.
If we
What
use
if
the
we
word
said
advanced.
the specific injection therapies listed below?
And those injection therapies are listed in B1,
Yes.
is that correct?
Yeah, I think that would be more legal to say, in order to perform
Well, they're-
injection
No,
therapies
because it
listed.
goes down, because in 3, we've got, 4, we've got more.
They're
and
listed
5,
in
we've got
B,
more.
not just in B1,
Right,
In B.
in B.
yes, in B.
It would be, yeah, so maybe we could reference subsection B as in boy, because all.
Yeah, in order to perform the injection therapies listed in subsection B, and then if new things come up, we can just add them to subsection B. I like that.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions regarding the chelation training blueprint? Again, this is what's currently used by the schools that do have the certification for this and is currently used by other certified providers. So moving on to section B, 3. This is for the PRP, platelet-rich plasma therapy. A naturopathic doctor must complete in addition 6 hours of instruction, including 4 hours of lecture and/or discussion and 2 hours of hand-on training in the preparation of PRP. The naturopathic doctor must be compliant with all applicable laws and regulations for handling blood products. And again, this is a general statement we put in there because these are regulations that are currently in flux. Like how many times you can puncture a vial that has had blood drawn into it and still use that blood product on a human is something that is currently regulated in one way and is likely to change. So we want to make sure that people are just continuing to be compliant. In addition, naturopathic doctors must be trained in each route of administration used. So we're saying that the 6 hours is just for the use of PRP as an agent that you can inject. You also need to have been appropriately trained in all the routes of administration. So subcutaneous and intradermal injections are, of course, part of the basic training of any naturopathic doctor, as are intramuscular. Intra-articular would certainly be a different route of administration that would need extra training. IV, I think we've covered. I don't know that anyone does PRP IV, actually. And then microneedling, which is a way that PRP is used, is actually listed below here.
So on the microneedling, I would propose that we say for microneedling that uses subcutaneous intradermal injection therapy, because the word microneedling is not exclusive to this format. I just looked up on Amazon microneedling, and you can get a derma roller microneedling kit, also called microdermabrasion device tool, and just purchase that for yourself. And it does not involve subcutaneous injections or any of the things listed this way. So that word is used loosely, and it also relates to a, the plum blossom tool that's used in traditional Chinese medicine is a form of microneedling. It's actually to stimulate, blood flow around a joint or whatever. So I think we just need to be careful with terms because there's no legal definition of microneedling. So if we say for microneedling involving or that uses subcutaneous, so we're basically specifically saying if you're calling it microneedling and it's involving subcutaneous and intradermal injection therapy, we might even want to be more specific with what substances, because there are homeopathic combinations that can be administered intradermal. There's neural therapy that's subcutaneous. There's paraneural injection therapies. These are all...
But none of those are microneedling. Those are all administered with like an individual single needle.
But when you say they're not microneedling, what do you mean? Like, what is your definition of it?
So there are specific microneedling devices, I think, is the definition. I mean, I understand your concern, but I don't want to get too far off and say that a paraneural injection was just clearly just, an injection that you do with a syringe and a needle would fall under that.
Well, what I'm saying is we might want to say for microneedling, which uses a pen for subcutaneous intradermal injection therapy.
So we could specify microneedling that uses some sort of a pen, or we could get the specific of that device.
Yeah.
I think that would be an appropriate way to specify. Because I think if we just say subcutaneous and intradermal, I don't think that clarifies any more. But I think that we're specifically, I think we're very clear that what we're specifically trying to regulate here is microneedling pens.
So for microneedling, that uses a microneedling
You could
pen.
say pen-type applicator or something along those lines.
But the way that it's phrased now, it says for microneedling, which involves subcutaneous intradermal injection therapy, is kind of like a description. I just think it could be interpreted in an exclusionary way. So I just want to change things around and make it more clear.
So what wording would you propose?
Or in order to use a microneedling pen, you could say, or for microneedling using a pen to give subcutaneous intradermal injection therapies.
But it does say 4 hours of training in the proper use of a microneedling pen. It's already in there.
I'm saying that there's other types of microneedling that I know naturopathic doctors are using that is not this. So,
Do they involve subcutaneous and intradermal injection therapy?
no.
Well, this already says for microneedling, which involves subcutaneous and intradermal injection therapy.
If you took the comma out and you use the word that instead of which, then you would be describing the type of microneedling instead of defining it, which is what you would get if you put a comma in and use the word which. The grammar changes the meaning of the sentence.
Right.
Sabina can help.
Don't say that. I like either of the suggestions, changing just to that, or the one, how you just rephrase the first part of the sentence. The second part, I think, is okay with the definition of the explanation of the type of training and how many hours is required.
So would
I could go
simply
either way.
changing it to that fix it? Because
We can.
it seems the simplest.
So I can remove the comma and change which
Yeah.
to that.
Correct.
Sounds good to me.
And I have a additional edit in that section as well, under 4.
Okay.
It's the same exact edit as above, where the last word should be code instead of section. And I have it again in 5, just to get that out there ahead of things.
Great.
Is there any chance that there will be another kind of microneedling that does involve subcutaneous intradermal injection therapy, but without a pen? I remember I was trained many years ago in something called mesotherapy, and they use, it's just it's a very fine needle, but it's with a syringe under the skin.
I think that's just a subcutaneous injection. I mean, that's what we do for HCG, that's what we do for insulin.
So
So I
it's
don't
pretty
think,
much the pen that's being regulated here. And does the pen pose more risk than regular subcutaneous injections, or is it just really tricky to use?
no, neither, in fact. And that's why the training requirement is only 4 hours. It's simply a different technique than doing a regular subcutaneous injection, and it's something that Rebecca's getting a lot of calls about. So we want to clarify what our licensees can and can't do.
And just so I understand, why are we requiring additional 4 years, 4 hours of training to use something that's very easy and straightforward to do?
Because you still have to learn to use it. I mean, 4 hours isn't a lot of time, but it is a different technique than doing a subcutaneous injection. It has small needles that puncture the skin over and over again and is run over the surface of the skin. So you wouldn't want someone to just pick that up and use it on someone without being appropriately trained.
Okay, thank you.
So it's not complicated, it's not inherently dangerous. I mean, I think there's some potential risk in that a lot of people use it on people's faces, so you do want to be trained as to how close you can get to the eyes, et cetera, things like that. But I think that it doesn't require a lot of training. I talked to several people who actually use this about that. And again, when we approve providers for this, we will come up with more specifics on exactly what we want people to be trained in. For example, in this particular therapy, there are specific things you need to do for patient safety regarding sanitation, right? Because the top of the pen is removed and is discarded and is a sharp and is only used, but then you've been doing this, you're holding the bottom of the pen, you got to make sure, was that sheathed, has it been wiped down between patients, et cetera, all of that. And then Section A just says that if PRP is used with microneedling, a naturopathic doctor must meet the training requirements for PRP. So you can't just say, oh, I'm doing microneedling and I'm going to do PRP with it. You have to do both trainings if you're going to combine those therapies. And yes, they can both be done independently of each other. They are just frequently combined.
Just so you guys know, when we were going through these, we tried to keep in mind how easily a training would be able to be taken by a licensee. We wanted to make sure that we weren't creating barriers also. But we want to also keep in mind that this added regulation is for the safety of the consumer. So we just need to make sure that everybody is receiving the same type of training and that somebody's not just watching a YouTube video and thinking that they can go out and do, PRP on somebody's face. So we really did try to think outside the box when we were going through this, but we wanted to make sure that we weren't creating a barrier for you guys to go and get this training.
And finally, for Section 5, this is for the use of ozone oxygen therapy. And there's a naturopathic doctor must complete an additional 12 hours of training by continued education provider approved by the committee, as outlined in Sections 36.3.5 and 36.3.5.2. And then
Of the code,
of the code,
sorry.
not the section. And then there are several points here. The treatment of blood, PRP, and saline with ozone gas, which is then injected into the vascular system or tissues, is allowed. The injection of ozone gas into the soft tissues is allowed. The direct injection of ozone gas into the vascular system is prohibited. So almost every injury that we have been able to find regarding the use of medical ozone is from injecting gas into the vascular system. These other routes, unless there's been some other problem with the procedure, are not things that result in injury. It is the direct injection of gas into the vascular system that has caused problems, so we are prohibiting that in California. And then the section, which is similar to PRP, naturopathic doctors must be trained in each route of administration used by ozone therapy, subcutaneous, intradermal, intramuscular, intraarticular, or intravenous. So the 12 hours is for general training in the use of ozone therapy. You need to have separate training in each route of administration.
There's other routes as insufflation.
Right, but again, that's not an injection therapy, which is what we're regulating here.
And does that cover?
Yeah, there's limb bagging, there's insufflation, there's all sorts of
And
other
would this
stuff.
cover dental?
Well, in dental, it's usually injection therapies, but we're not dentists, so.
We can't do an injection in the mouth? Yes, we can.
If you were doing it as a dental procedure?
No, you're doing it as a dental procedure, but there might be an
Right,
infection.
a naturopathic doctor should be able to do injections in the mouth, but they are not acting as a dentist, nor
Right.
should it be termed
Of
a dental
course.
procedure. That's just a soft tissue injection.
Okay.
Any questions on that? And then the next section, which is office requirements. This is a big chunk for us. And this section includes general office requirements and also the emergency kit. So all naturopathic practices that offer intravenous or injection therapies must use appropriate, clean, and sterile techniques and equipment at all times. Compliance with all current state and federal laws must be in place. So that's just another one of those, we don't want to get into the specifics of the laws because they're going to be in flux. We're just saying you need to be in compliance. Compliant and appropriate sharps containers, biohazard containers, and waste disposal products and services must be used and adhered to. A mobile emergency box or cabinet must be maintained within the office where these therapies are performed at all times. The kit must contain all appropriate and unexpired products. The emergency kit must include all of the following, but is not limited to: oxygen tank and flow meter, mask, cannula, and tubing. So you can't just have the oxygen, you need to be able to actually put it on the person. Berman-type oral airway device, blood pressure cuff, stethoscope, additional IV fluids, tubing and needles, glucose tabs or equivalent, gloves, gauze, bandages. I think there's a comma missing there. Are we saying gauze and bandages or gauze bandages?
That's how it was given to me, so I
Maybe
guess-
we're just saying gauze bandages and tape. Required medication to include ammonia salts, epinephrine, 2 different concentrations, because we're talking about IV therapies. We want use for intramuscular subcutaneous and also IV administration. Injectable dextrose, calcium gluconate, or calcium chloride at these proposed concentrations, diphenhydramine. I'm sorry, should the diphenhydramine, we looked this up, didn't we, that the oral and the IV dosing was the same for the diphenhydramine? Because this just says diphenhydramine, it doesn't specify the oral versus IV.
I think I remember Dr. Osborne saying it was based on weight, and so that's why the children was, because
Right.
you could have a 12-year-old that is as large as an adult, so it would be
Correct.
the same.
Yes, no, we're just saying the difference between dosing oral diphenhydramine and IV diphenhydramine, and I think that the dosing was actually the same, and I was surprised by that.
So you
We
might
did.
want to list oral and IV diphenhydramine, because you don't need to put the actual prescription in the code here, do you? In the regulation.
So for the emergency kit, we did put the,
You're saying you need to have calcium gluconate and epinephrine, but you're not telling people how to dose it in the regulation.
mhm.
So why don't you just list diphenhydramine,
Oral and IV.
if you're requiring oral and IV, or oral and IV
Yeah,
diphenhydramine?
that does make sense. Let's do that.
So you just want to keep it and take the 1 and 2 out?
Correct.
Okay.
And then put oral and IV
I would say oral and injectable.
and injectable.
Okay. And you know what, I believe that we had decided to put thermometer in here as well, right? I thought I did, and I'm not seeing it in here, so.
I certainly think
thermometer-
one should have one.
I'm sorry?
I said I certainly think that they.
Yeah, so,
An emergency kit, though.
And you have it in your office already.
Right, because this is just the emergency kit.
yeah, but I think that,
Right, but I think taking
needs to be
someone's
with
temperature
it
in an
if
emergency is
it's-
probably, you do want to have that ability to do
in the
that.
kit, yeah. So I think that's why we added it there.
It's pertinent for infection and shock and things like that.
And just a spelling thing is, under calcium gluconate, it's 1 gram vial, VIAL, right? Or
Yes,
is
it
okay.
is. I was reading
Could be
that and I
vial.
kept thinking, is that correct?
And I
I
believe,
was like, I don't know if this is a special IV term that I don't know.
and it should be pre-filled syringes.
Oh, ED, yeah. Great. And then in addition, the following items are required on the premises at all times: an emergency defibrillator and a backboard.
We may want to decide if we want to put periods after everything in a list or not, just to keep it clean. I probably wouldn't put them after every item in the list or after backboard, for example.
Yeah. We can look at those non-technical changes as we put it all together, and when you do your motion, you'll be authorizing the executive officer to take care of those kind of non-technical changes.
Great. F, a designated refrigerator with controlled temperature must be on site for all refrigerated and unopened, all refrigerated and opened multi-use injectables. The storage of food, blood products, or biological materials in the same refrigerator is prohibited. Other injectables and IV solutions that do not require refrigeration must be stored per manufacturer instructions. So again, we're saying that some injectables come and they require refrigeration, they immediately go into the fridge. Even things which can be stored at room temperature once punctured need to be stored in the refrigerator. And then we need to store other injectables per the manufacturer instructions, meaning that if it's supposed to be at controlled room temperature, you need to make sure your IV suite is at controlled room temperature. Things are stored such as that. Office must have access to restrooms and must be accessible to persons with disabilities.
So I have, I would like at the very beginning for us to specify the injection therapies that we're referring to, just like we did in the previous section. Because obviously you don't need this level of stuff to do a B12 shot. You can do those in the field. You don't need to have all this stuff. There's also multi-use containers that don't require refrigeration that you can use that aren't part of the stuff that we've talked about before. So I just want to refer again to the section that we,
Right.
just like before.
So we can refer in A about, we can refer
To 4237.2.
point 2, right,
So listed in,
1 and 2. Right, because it's going to be the IV and injection therapies.
Yeah.
I think that's a great plan. I would say that I think after they're punctured, all multi-use injectables are supposed to be stored refrigerated. I know people don't necessarily do that in practice, but that is my understanding.
Might that be covered under manufacturer instructions?
Sure.
yeah, and pharmacy. And some people who do certain procedures all day long, like Procaine, they'll have it open. You can, it's okay. I mean, it's not actually recommended to store it in the refrigerator, I don't believe. You can use multi-dose vial and you keep drawing from it because you can't keep it drawn for more than an hour technically. So to be going back and forth constantly to your refrigerator versus just having the vial, which is,
Well, right, that's something I think that Sabina's correct. That needs to be done per the manufacturer instructions.
Yeah.
Like, I think you're right. That's not for us to decide.
Right, and you have that statement in there already in F that addresses everything. Well, that one,
So we could take out and opened multi-use injectables because all refrigerated encompasses open multi-use injectables that require refrigeration after they're opened.
and shouldn't they all be subject to the manufacturer's storage instructions anyway, no matter what?
Yes.
for all injectables requiring refrigeration.
I like that wording, for all injectables requiring refrigeration. It sums it up nicely. Not painting ourselves into a corner. And then it says other injectables and IV solutions that don't require refrigeration must be stored per manufacturer instructions. Yeah, I think that works.
So it's 12:35. Did you want to break for lunch, or did you want to finish this one last?
I think this
small-
one last one is pretty quick.
Yeah, it is.
Just a question about G and H. Is there a reason why we have to say access to restrooms and accessibility to persons with disabilities? Specifically for the IV and injection therapies?
I think that when the committee was meeting,
Yeah,
we,
except you.
we as a group thought that those were important things to have in place in an IV suite. Certainly, you should not have an IV suite without accessibility to restrooms, because there's significant safety issue if someone has to, is hooked up to an IV and can't access a restroom, or has to walk somewhere to access a restroom while they're hooked up to an IV. Accessibility to persons with disabilities probably doesn't need to be in there, because it is just part of sort of California code, and certain people are exempted if they're a small enough building. So I think that we could take that out, but I think the restroom accessibility is important.
Right, I think the idea is we didn't want people walking with an IV outside down the, corridor to a shared restroom with the rest of the strip mall or
Right.
something, some kind of similar idea like that.
Right, exactly.
That would be dangerous.
Yeah.
All right, so we can strike H.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
people just need to be ADA compliant, whatever. It's covered under state and federal regulations. Probably just missed that when we were doing it.
Sorry, Sabina's comment just made me think that the way this is worded, it says the office must have access to restrooms. They could have access to restrooms elsewhere in the strip mall, so to speak. Do you want them to say that,
It says on premises.
yeah,
Yeah, I think we need to
You could say
say
within the IV, whatever suite, you just use the office suite?
Well, we don't
or-
want to actually say within the IV suite, because I think it is safe for someone to walk out of one room into another to use the bathroom, you just
Right,
don't
we
want
just
them
don't
walking
want
down
them
down the street to another building. I think within the office
Starbucks.
is certainly fine.
Why don't you just say the office must have restrooms en suite, or the office must have,
Office must have access, must have restrooms on site, I think it's fine. I think any medical office should, honestly.
on-site could still mean down the hall. if
Well,
somebody
but I
reads
don't
that.
think we're saying down the hall is inherently dangerous. Like if someone needs to go to the bathroom
No,
and they
but-
need to walk.
What we're talking about down the hall in a shared restroom, like with the accountant's office and stuff. If you're in a building with a shared restroom.
Right. I think that, but didn't we just say within the office?
So why don't we say restrooms must be available within the office? In the office. In the office is the practice.
Right, so the office must have access to restrooms.
So restrooms must be available in the office.
Is that different than how it's worded right now?
Yes, because access means, you just go outside.
I see.
Uh-huh.
In the office. Give it a key like at the gas station.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the office must have restrooms on site.
Yes.
Restrooms must be available in the office, in the
Right.
office.
Because you could, on-site could be the strip mall.
Gotcha.
So just clarification, because my office, I have a key to the restroom, which is like 3 feet out my front door of my office, and you need a key in the hallway. That would not be covered then under this, because it's not within the office, per se. It's within the building. Or you're talking about office, within the office building?
So they don't have to go outside.
Right, they don't have to.
No, what was the intent of you guys putting this in here? What was your thought? Why is it here?
Our intent was, again, safety and the fact that people are hooked up to IVs. They need to use the restroom. They need to not put themselves in an unsafe situation wandering around with an IV bag trying to
So-
find the bathroom.
So if they
Like,
have to go
in
down
a-
the hallway, even though it's not in your office,
In
is that?
addition, if somebody had some kind of adverse reaction when they're in a bathroom, if it's way far outside of your building or down a hall that there's nobody around to provide assistance
Yeah,
to.
I mean, it is a questionable situation to have someone step out of the office and be somewhere that you might not be able to hear them. If they
In the
hooked up
hospital,
to an
you
IV.
have a nurse bell that you just ring if you fall and can't get up, but
I mean, in our office, we have
We've-
a bathroom, like,
button.
within the IV suite, which has like a hook that you can hang your bag on and such. And I know that that's not possible for everyone, but we're just trying to figure out like what is safe. So we want there to be restroom access because people are going to need to use the restroom when they're hooked up to the IV and they need to be able to get to it safely. That's the intent. So how do we want to do this wording? I know everyone's getting hungry. We might have to do this last section afterwards.
So the problem with keeping it as is that it's too general.
So I propose restrooms must be available in the office. Right? That's what we mean. We mean within the practice. We don't mean down the hall.
Right.
We don't mean you take a key. It's going to upset some people, but that's,
I think this is an undue
In the
burden.
office and within the office. So I think, within the office is more, it gives you more clarity. In the office is a little bit subjective. So within the office,
But that's saying the same thing. If we're saying that the bathroom has to be within this room, or the bathroom has to be in this room, it's still in the room.
okay. But
Right.
within is a little clearer that it's contained within the practice. Yeah.
But then, as Minna was saying, if it's the next door over, then this would be
Right,
invited.
and are we
And that's undue
putting
burden.
something in that's going to be problematic? So, say you have a doctor who's, yeah, like say you have a doctor who's practicing alone with one staff person. So it would still be legal for them to do IV therapy. And they're administering the IV and they're monitoring the IV. And if their patient needs to use the restroom, they're walking that patient out the door, they're standing outside the door while the patient's using the restroom, and then they're walking them back. Like, is that a patient safety risk? I don't think so, if it's right outside the door, like you're saying. So like, how do we need to word it to preserve the patient's safety?
Would it be more safe if there is a staff person? I don't want to start writing language about babysitting someone outside the restroom.
Right.
But it's more about, like you said, you may not be able to hear somebody fall down or hear
Right.
somebody maybe get violently ill.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
don't
that's
know.
the thing is that we have this thing in our office that comes up. We practice in downtown San Francisco, and so people's parking meters will run out, and they'll be like, can I just run out and put money in my meter? And we're like, no, you cannot walk down the street with your IV bag and put money in your meter. Describe your car to us. We will send someone. You'll learn how to use their own app. So, I mean, these are the things we're trying to prevent happening, right? Is someone basically wandering off with their IV bag. So how do we do that, like, wording-wise, so that it works? So that we're not restricting a situation like Mina described, where she's
Right.
standing outside the door, everything's fine, she's not leaving the patient's not far away.
Why don't we say restrooms must be easily
Monitored by staff.
Must be close and easily accessible.
Or, easily.
Easily monitored by staff.
I like that. Restroom, so we can say office must have access to restrooms which are easily monitored by staff. I think that's totally reasonable.
Even close can get a little tricky.
Right,
Right.
close is a very subjective term.
Right, yeah. We don't want to make somebody
Yeah.
listen in on the.
And again, we don't want to create barriers. We don't want to cause an ND to have to go find another practice just because of a restroom
Can you repeat
issue,
that?
so.
So we would say office must have access to restrooms which are easily monitored by staff.
Yeah.
I think that
Access to
encompasses
restrooms
everything we're trying to
that.
say here.
Access to restrooms that are easily monitored by
You
staff.
don't like that which
Does not
word, do
like
you?
which.
I know
Sorry,
my
I'm not
grammar,
even
and it
sure
means
what the
two different
grammatical
things.
difference is.
And then we're striking H.
Yes.
Yes, because it's covered in the
Correct.
first section about all laws. And
I think we can do the last section. I think we'll be okay.
is everyone okay with that? The last section's pretty fast.
This one's real fast.
This has to do with staffing requirements. So again, we did not, when we had originally written it, we had put CPR for all doctors and staff, and then Sabina broke it up so that they would be listed separately. So all naturopathic doctors and staff participating in providing patients with IV infusions or injection therapies must have appropriate licensing and/or certifications. So you need to be licensed or certified to do what you're doing.
So I'd like to just change this one around so that we say, as per the sections, just like we did on everything else,
Correct,
have
referring
the
back up.
appropriate licensing and certifications as listed.
Are they sections or codes?
No, it's sections, because the 4237.1 and 4237.2 refer to the CCR section, not the actual statute, which is code.
Right. And I had a suggestion on subsection B as in boy. The last statement, this is a minimum requirement, isn't that implied and there must be at least one?
Sure, we can take that out. It had been a longer section, which I tried to shorten in, but if you guys want to take it out entirely, it's fine.
Yeah, it just seemed.
I mean, it's one of those, doctors need to use their best judgment in that this is what but I think you're right. I think it's implied. I think this is what we're requiring, and don't be an idiot and say, oh, we can do this if something really complicated is going on. So there must be at least one staff member and one naturopathic doctor on site during IV or injection therapies when there are 1 to 10 patients present. An additional staff member or naturopathic doctor is required for every 5 additional patients. So doctor and at least one staff member for 1 to 10. 15 patients would be doctor and 2 staff members, or 2 doctors and 1 staff, 3 people, basically.
And just to clarify, do you mean 1 to 10 receiving IVs, or do you mean 1 to 10 total in the office, seeing other doctors?
We mean receiving IVs.
So maybe we should clarify that, just so it doesn't get.
I think that's a good idea.
So I have a question too about additional staff member or naturopathic doctor. There's a big difference between having a staff person who is, let's say, monitoring the front desk and has your basic CPR skills versus a naturopathic doctor who has advanced or has training as a doctor.
Right, and we're only requiring the additional staff member, and I think the reason or a naturopathic doctor was added in there was to not exclude another naturopathic doctor as an option. So if you have 2 naturopathic doctors on site, you do not need to have that staff person as well, is what we're saying. You need to have 2 people. They could just be a minimally trained CPR trained front desk person, but they could be another doctor and not have the front desk person there.
So we should say there must be at least 2 people present during IV or injection therapies, or 1 additional person, 1 naturopathic doctor and 1 additional person on site, or.
So actually, I'm looking at the
Yeah.
opposite as a standard of safety, having another doctor present versus a
Right.
staff member.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but when we looked at it from a safety standpoint, if an emergent situation comes up and you've got the doctor on site, you've got all the things in the emergency kit, what you really need is another person to like call 911 while you're doing CPR or something like that. Like in the moment.
Right.
What do you need? You need to not be alone.
Right. But if two
And all
people
your
go down
staff
at the
is
same
gonna
time,
need-
not that it will happen, you have 2 staff people and a naturopathic doctor. If there's, let's say, 2 people that are having issues with, God
I mean-
forbid, yeah, I'm just, worst case scenario here.
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying. I just think there's always a flukish outside possibility that 2 people are going to have an emergent situation at the same time. I don't know that that's ever happened in the history of injection therapy in California, so.
Perfect. Okay.
But even if it did, you would still need an additional person
Yeah.
to
That I'm not
activate
arguing,
the
that, yeah.
EMS or
Perfect. Okay.
something.
So do we need to clarify here as far as 1 staff member and 1 naturopathic doctor? Because in my mind, 1 staff member could be another naturopathic doctor, they just don't have to be. But do we need to clarify that more?
I don't think that we should qualify them to be another naturopathic doctor. That's an undue burden.
No, what
No,
she's
no,
saying
no.
is helping people understand that there's an option, that it could be staff or doctor.
Right, that you
It could be
could just
anybody.
have 2 doctors who are sharing an office, and say it's the weekend and you want to be doing IVs and you're both there, and one of you's doing IVs and the other one is there, you don't necessarily have to pay a front desk person to also be in the office at the same time to be in compliance, I think is the scenario that we're talking about.
But then wouldn't that be included as a staff member then?
Right, that's the question.
If it's a
Can we
doctor,
leave it
then
as is, or do we need to
It
change
might be
it?
interpreted as differently. They might think of a doctor as staff. Staff works for the doctors.
Yeah.
Staff is kind of implies an
What if-
employee.
What if it says there must be at least 2
Persons.
Personnel.
on site during IV or injection therapies, and after personnel, put at least 1 naturopathic doctor?
Of which one is the naturopathic doctor?
Of which?
I
Of
like
which
that.
one is, hey, we can use
Right,
which.
because the other thing that wording
One time you can use
does.
it.
Yes, you can use which. I will, at lunchtime, I'll give you a lecture on that and which.
The other thing that wording does is it prevents the naturopathic doctor from coming, starting the IV, leaving their naturopathic medical assistant on site and going to grab lunch,
Yeah, because that can't be done.
because we don't want them doing that either.
There must be at least 2 persons on site at all times.
Personnel, because otherwise
Personnel.
patients are also
Personnel.
people. Yeah,
Of which one is the naturopathic doctor.
right. And we're taking out this as a minimum requirement.
Okay. So there must be at least 2 personnel on site, one of which must be a naturopathic doctor.
And then the next sentence works well with that.
During
An
IV.
Additional staff member or naturopathic doctor is required, so that actually works well with that wording. It doesn't have to be changed, and then we're taking out the minimum requirement statement. Are we good on the wording on that?
Yep.
The naturopathic doctor or their staff will obtain written informed consent from the patient prior to administration of IV or injection therapies. Certification in CPR is required for all staff members on site, and naturopathic assistants must adhere to section 3640.2 of the code, which is the section that says what a naturopathic assistant can do. And again, this is one of those, we're just referring back to the code in case that changes. So what naturopathic assistants can do could potentially change in the future, so we don't want to say any of it here.
Do you have the wording for A, okay? Do you have the wording for A, okay? Do you? Okay, or with the sections and all that? Okay, thank you.
Does anyone have any other questions or comments on these regulations?
I just want to say they're very clear and simple, and I know they were distilled from a huge amount of discussion and back and forth, and so I really, really appreciate the work of the subcommittee. You guys worked really hard on this. It's very
Thank you.
clear. You know somebody worked hard on it when it's like super clear, all-inclusive and simple, it's elegant, then you know there's a lot of work got put into it.
It didn't start out that way.
Sure.
It was my first attempt at creating from scratch and not just going and amending regulatory language. So when I sent it to her the first time, she's like, you might want to split it all up so it's easier to read. I'm like, okay, fine. So here's what we have. So I'm glad, and the subcommittee did a great job getting this all created, and
It's exciting.
It is that which they did.
So I do have one quick,
Yes.
just clarification, and this is back to the oral chelation, I'm sorry. But just in terms of, so now I have 2 questions. So administering the oral chelators during testing, is it that then the practitioner will then continue to use oral chelation to rectify the high metal levels that are found then, or they could move into IV? And if that's the case, if they're going to use oral, then are the regulations as we've drafted, is that going to cover?
So in answer to your first question, when testing is done with an oral chelating agent, the treatment can also be achieved with an oral chelating agent. The IV is not a necessary next step in that scenario. I mean, that's not true for every metal because not every chelating agent binds every metal. But if you are treating for the metals that were tested with the oral chelating agent, you should be able to use the oral chelating agent to treat, if that makes sense. So there's not a necessity for IV therapy in that scenario. And then, as we had said earlier, I think we're saying that the use of an oral chelating agent falls under the laws of our pharmacology laws, because you need to be appropriately trained to use any medication, and you need to have taken pharmacology and know how to use it. That goes for antibiotics and asthma meds and everything.
Okay. So then to follow up, some supplements have EDTA in them, so.
Right. I see what
But
you're
still.
saying. Do we specify IV EDTA in that so we're not prohibiting the use of EDTA?
It says and other IV, and all other IV healing agents, doesn't it?
Yes, but I see exactly what you're saying, Vera, because EDTA is in a lot of stuff. I mean, it's a very common additive in very low doses. It's not a chelating dose, but it's used in a variety of different supplements, medications. It's a common additive. I mean, it's an additive in like skincare products. So I think we do need to specify we could say the use of the following IV agents, and then list EDTA, DMPS, and any other known IV chelating agents. Can we do the wording like that?
Is this page 51 for?
This is page 51.
B1?
B1, the notorious B1.
Why don't you say for the use of IV chelating agents, including EDTA and DMPS, comma.
That sounds much simpler. Yeah.
Greta, I'm going to start sending stuff your way for,
I know, she's like the master editor.
she is, she really is.
How can I make this wording more simple and clear?
So for the use of IV chelating agents,
Comma, including
comma, including,
EDTA and DMPS, comma, a naturopathic doctor must have.
okay?
Great.
So before we entertain a motion on moving this proposed regulatory text forward, did you want Rebecca to go back through all of the changes that you've approved? Or are you good with our discussion as we went along?
I
We
feel
ironed it
okay
out
with our
pretty well.
discussion. I think we hashed them out pretty well in the moment.
Okay. And again, like I mentioned earlier, your motion will be delegating authority to her to fix those non-substantive changes and technical cleanups, maybe some more grammar that we might need. So she still will have the authority to do that without coming back to the board. So because this is regulatory text, we have that really long motion that I like to read, and somebody can bless it unless you want to read my motion on my computer. No? So the motion would read, I move that we approve the proposed text for a 45-day public comment period and delegate to the executive officer the authority to adopt the proposed regulatory changes if there are no adverse comments received during the public comment period, to follow established procedures and processes of doing so, and also to delegate to the executive officer the authority to make any technical and non-substantive changes that may be required in completing the rulemaking file.
Can I get a motion?
I move that we adopt that motion.
With the edits, okay.
With the, yes, with the proposed edits.
Second?
I second.
Thanks. All right, I'll take a roll call vote. Dr. Dara Thompson,
Aye.
Dr. Greta D'Amico,
Aye.
Dr. Vera Singleton,
Aye.
Dr. Bruce Davidson.
Aye.
Thank you. Dr. Mina Yoon,
Aye.
Ms. Shirley Worrells.
Aye.
All right, great. And that passes with 6.
The public comment period, is that advertised somewhere? The 45-day public?
Oh, correct, yes.
Yeah.
Everything will go out to, on the website, as well as interested parties
Mm-hmm.
mailing lists.
Yep.
So like the CNDA?
Yes.
We may just have, each one of us caught a little something that kind of changed everything, and they're, putting it out to the rest of
Absolutely.
the
You
people in the
probably
state
are
would be
not,
great.
you probably are not done seeing this language.
Yeah.
Right.
So don't worry.
Do you want to do a 30? Because I think,
can finish eating if they need.
Are people okay with a 30-minute lunch so we can, yeah, great.
perfect. Yeah, we have a meet and greet after, yeah.